Welcome to this DATATHENA presentation on data breaches. In this session, we're going to consider how to prevent loss, devise a breach response plan, and what to do when the worst happens. So you may have seen recently that there have been lots of very high-profile hacks, especially in the news. So we've had a myriad of commercial hacks from things like the Ashley Madison dating website hack, which revealed all the information of people who'd signed up to a website that facilitated various connections between adults who may or may not have been in relationships, and there were some ethical concerns around that, which resulted in a lot of very personal and public loss for people and a lot of embarrassment. So that was one example of how actually something seemingly just like a hack can have a real impact on people's lives. There have also been prominent hacks for companies like TalkTalk in the UK, and you may have noticed, although perhaps it couldn't have failed to escape your notice, the discussions around the presidential elections in the USA and the so-called buzzword fake news. So with regards to fake news, one of the things that have been discussed quite heavily is espionage by the Russian authorities and potential hacks as to who may have had information and insight into voting patterns in the USA, amongst other things. So that's a very lively topic. So as you can see, it can go from businesses to very, very personal, private, embarrassing hacks, right through to the top of governments and, Day of the Jackal type hacking. Or for those of you who watch the BBC's Night Manager, sort of very much, sort of James Bond-esque, sort of industrial espionage. So that's really just to kind of set the scene for where we're going with everything today. So what it highlights really is that you need to know your risks. So what we've got here is a threat spectrum. So you'll need to consider hacking, which is something that's certainly news grabbing, but perhaps happens slightly less than you'd think. A bit more common actually is employee error. I've actually worked on a very wide number of data breaches for very large companies and FTSE 100s and PLCs, where the data breach has resulted from nothing more simple than an employee error of sending an email to the wrong person, not filing something properly, leaving a laptop on a train, things that can happen to any one of us, when perhaps we're tired or we're stressed or we're not thinking. So that's really one of the key risks I think is worth highlighting. And we're going to have a look at training later on, but employee error is a really critical issue to attack. It's easy to get caught up in the more exciting, girl with the dragon tattoo, Lisbeth Salander type hacking and Snowden leaks and external hacking, which is on that list. But quite frequently it's actually employee error that leads to risks. There are also technological risks, so things like having unlocked USB drives. So do you allow your staff to just put USB sticks into devices owned by your company? They may be infected with viruses, for instance, but they also present a secondary threat that people could walk away with your information. So it's worth considering as part of maybe your information security plan whether you're allowing individuals to make use of USB sticks or external devices to download information. I wouldn't just limit that as well in the virus sense to old school things like USB drives. Do have a think as well about things like Dropbox and use of cloud storage devices and what risks they present to your business, and if you actually want your employees to be able to make use of them. And then there's also spam and malware. So we've all had them, those emails that say click the link, you've won £1 million, or the tax man, in a completely uncharacteristic twist of fate, has decided to give you back, all last year's tax that you overpaid. And people click the links, it infects the computers, and before you know it, you might have an issue at that computer or with an entire network. So now we've had to think about what those threats might be, sort of at a broad level, just to get our minds limbered up to the challenges that we face. How can we actually prevent data loss? This map, or hive as you will, of issues just sets out some of the ways in which your business might be exposing itself to risk in its day-to-day processing activities. I'd actually recommend that you print this out if you can. You'll be able to get a copy via the website if you want to get a print-outable copy to maybe put up in your office, or if you even just want, a version that you'd like to maybe use as screensavers, do let us know. Contact us direct and we can provide that. Some of the risks you've got here represented on this map are people working from home and making use of their own devices. So have a think, do you allow your business to make use of personal devices for business reasons? When they're making use of those devices, it's taking backup data in the phone to make it work better, or on the iPad or on the laptop, and that could all be running in the background of the computer there, and could be something that could be accessed and could really, lead to a data loss. With things like home working as well, it's even just simple things such as if people nip out to Starbucks, or even if they're just in work and they nip out to go get a quiet 5 minutes to do something. Who's looking at your computer? If you're on the train, make sure you're not reading things in front of people. These are all relatively non-sexy things, but they're actually the things that can cause data loss. I've seen lots of examples where I've been on the train and I've seen people looking at very highly confidential information in relation to business restructurings, or even records relating to social service care records of individuals who have very significant health and mental health issues. And I could read all of them quite easily from these individuals' laptops. That's a data breach, a very serious one. If I'd known that person, for instance, I could have gone and told them that, it had happened, that the person who's the subject of the materials, or if I work for a rival company, knowing about the restructuring could have been, very useful information for me. So it's not just about data loss. It can really affect your business advantage. And that brings me on to training awareness. You've got to get this across to your staff. Staff need to understand that every single one of them is, in a sense, a fire marshal for data protection and for making sure that cyber breaches don't happen. It's as simple as making sure that sheets of paper are not left on the photocopier, that computers are locked when people walk away to go to the loo or to get a cup of coffee. All very simple things, but they're all incredibly important aspects of data hygiene. Making sure that they know that they shouldn't be working on trains on highly confidential matters, or that the documents should be sanitized if they decide to do that. Not talking about clients in lifts or on planes, trains, automobiles, or to members of their family, or wherever it may be. Check your data policies and see if they cover these things. Have a look at your staff handbook too, which governs your relationship with your staff. Check it and see that you're explaining to people how you expect them to process and manage data. Think too about password security. Make sure that staff are choosing, very unique passwords and not ones that are simple to break. So, not password one, for instance. I regret to say it, but I've seen it more frequently than you would imagine. And not to use the same password for all of their different platforms through which they operate. So, for instance, don't use your Facebook password the same as your work password, the same as your banking password, because if a fraudster or hacker did get into that one account, they've got into everything. You've basically given them all the keys to the house and all of the crown jewels and everything else, and your TV and your microwave and whatever else might be worth stealing. So have a think about that and make sure that you're training your staff on how to choose appropriate passwords. I usually recommend something in non-standard English, so basically something that's gibberish to anything but the person, or to have a think about how they can spell a word using the @ sign or hashtags just to make it more difficult to break. Another really good tip is to use the pound sign, because that's obviously only more frequently used in the UK as opposed to the rest of the globe. So one way to ameliorate the risk of picking out a password through the ciphers that can automatically generate them and try and find the correct password to hack you is to use pound signs, because they're less common in the global context of the use of passwords. It's a little tip I had from a cyber hacker, actually, so you can have it on good authority. It's from a horse's mouth. Have a look at your email encryption as well. Do encrypt emails if you can. It's a really good way to make sure that information has a little bit of extra protection when it's sent out to individuals, and train people on what phishing emails look like. If you get a really good example, don't necessarily forward it round because people might click on the link, but take a photocopy of it, a good copy, or a screen grab, and say, look, this is the type of phishing exercise that we've been subject to. If you see an email like this, don't open it, call IT, tell them about it, or speak to whoever's in charge of IT, and then deal with it that way. If it's got anything sort of alleging that it's from HMRC or the bank, and if you say you're a smaller business and you don't have an IT team, call up, the relevant authority that this communication is allegedly meant to be from and speak to them. That's a really good tip for your private life too. One of my relatives recently was called up by a phone company, or someone alleging to be the phone company, saying that she owed more money on her phone bill. And she knew just from the nature of the call, even though it was quite convincing and they were asking for passcodes and things, that it didn't really feel like an experience that she'd usually had with this call centre when they had rung her up in the past. And so she put the phone down, called up the telecommunications provider, and they said that it was indeed a scam. So, do approach with caution when you get those things. I've also seen text messages too alleging to be from banks. Treat those with extreme caution because most often they're not the bank, or call up the bank. Also have a look too about managing network access and security privileges. Have a think, does everyone in the organisation need access to something? Are there ways to manage accounts so that, say for instance, only the HR department have access to certain records? Encourage departments to make sure that they're putting password protections on certain files and make certain drives, for instance, only accessible by certain departments. These are all good ways, again, to manage your risk because there's internal and external risks. Sometimes employees take information when they shouldn't or access things that they shouldn't see, and it's important to make sure that to the fullest extent you can, you're putting up gates to prevent that happening. I'd also say as well that in terms of making sure we're giving effect to this, it's good to have a risk management program in place that's supported by the board and seen to be supported by your board members or your CEO or whoever it may be who's sort of leading the heart and mind of the organisation. One of the things that we can assist you with, if it's something that you want to consider further, is to put in place risk management programs or come in and do training and bring these issues to life using cyber hackers and lawyers to explain common risks that we've seen in the market, and then to look at how you can go about putting a risk management project in place that's sympathetic and works with the ideals of your organisation and your budget and how you need to go about achieving compliance for wherever you are in the stage of the journey of sort of your business life. And that really follows on to about introducing incident management and reporting procedures. The worst thing you could happen is that someone has a breach or does something like clicks on one of those spam emails or sends something out to the wrong person and doesn't know who to report it to, or feels that if they do, they'll get in trouble. What's more important is to make sure that there's an open culture with regards to reporting things like data losses and that people know who to go to. So you may say in the first instance, go to your line manager and report it to them. Or you may prefer for it to be reported to a data protection officer if you have one within your organisation. So have a think about how you want to manage reporting. These are things that you should be covering off in your policies and procedures that we talked about before. If you want to get examples of a really good data privacy policy that complies with the current Data Protection Act 1998 and also the forthcoming General Data Protection Regulation 2018, which comes into force in May 2018, do have a look at our document shop. It covers everything from how staff have to deal with information, how you process staff information in the context of HR, and what you require from them in terms of their data processing activities. And it also makes that document binding in terms of your employment process. So if your current employment contract doesn't cover that at the moment, this document makes sure that it is covered off and that it's actually legally binding on them. So if you had a problem and it resulted, say, in a disciplinary matter or a grievance, you'll have this policy as a binding measure and you'll be able to deal with the grievance procedure accordingly. And you can also have a think about other things such as your operational aspects. So we said about maybe an IT security program and a risk management program. You'd also want to have a look at things like what's available on the market, like encryption, malware protection, and making sure that you've got in place appropriate operational products. Again, it's a very good idea to get the terms and conditions for those operational projects reviewed. It's a service that we offer if it's something that you need to explain how to Make sure that you have appropriate liability provisions and appropriately clauses in those contracts so that if you're getting your security outsourced, you know that if something bad does happen, you're protected and you can recover your loss for those particular matters. If you want to know more about outsourcing more generally, we do have a free video on that. It's covered in our Privacy 101 Basics. So do go have a look at that video. I think it's about halfway through if you're just interested in outsourcing, if you skip through the slider to get to the relevant part, but I would recommend that you watch the whole thing if you can, because it explains some important points about certain aspects of your business that expose you to key data risks. Which brings me on to my next point: prevention is better than cure. Have a look at your security policies. You could consider running a mock breach event. They are ever so much fun. I would say that because it's my job, but they're great. You can run them where you have someone come in and give you a breach scenario. We also have the ability to bring in hackers, so we can actually get a real hacker to come in and do a mock scenario where you get hacked, and they will show you what would happen to your systems in that event and then tell you what you could do better. I find these are a brilliant way to actually train your staff, because everyone really enjoys the session and it just brings these sort of seemingly far-reaching concepts to life. If you want to know more about our mock breach events, do feel free to contact us via the website and just say mock breach, and then we'll give you a call back and have a chat about how we could put one of those together for you. People seem to really, really enjoy them because there is an element of theatre about them, but at the end of the day, people do understand so much better what their risks are. And we also show them, even in their own personal circumstances, how they're exposing themselves to risk. And we found that when we do that, actually, your employees take more responsibility of your business too, because they're more aware actually then why privacy is important, and it's not just something else they need to comply with, and that it's not just a policy, it's actually everyone's responsibility. From running that, you can develop a breach response plan to think about how you would go about dealing with a breach. Again, we do develop those with you. We have precedents as well to sort of start you on your way that we can talk you through via webinars like this, or via face-to-face interactions, or delivery through sort of virtual training sessions that are completely bespoke to you and take it through you on your desk so that it works for you in the way that you need it to. Another thing that's useful to consider, not just looking at the regulatory requirements, is to think about how you're going to cover your losses if you had a breach. Which brings me on to the point about insurance. If you're seeking insurance for your general business, it probably won't cover cyber losses and data protection losses. So you might need to go and get a specialist product for that. There are several on the market now. If you look on Google, I'm sure you'll be able to find them quite quickly. And do have a look at the terms for those. You can have a look at the terms, and one of the things you'll see is the losses are actually quite low, and what's covered by the breach sort of insurance policy isn't necessarily everything that you would need to have covered off in a breach scenario. So you need to make sure that you can recover the costs of your legal fees or specialist advisor fees for things like dealing with the reputational outcome of the matter. So, hiring people who can issue press statements, for instance, or even the cost of setting up hotlines if people want to call in and complain about what's happened with their data, or to just reassure them that you've got processes in place to deal with it. Even for a small business, it's worth considering cyber insurance. The premiums will probably be a bit lower, depending on the coverage that you're seeking. But since cyber threat is only ever increasing, and if you're taking things like payments, I would really encourage you to have a think about just even looking at insurance products on the market. I'd appreciate it's not for everyone at this time, but better to have a mind to it now and to have a think a bit more about the products prior to the GDPR than to do it when it's in force, because I think you'll see that the prices of the products will probably go up a bit, because it will become sort of the latest fashion to have it. So do just have a little bit of a think about how maybe you want to go about putting aside some budget for it if you think it's something you want to do. And then we have a data breach team. It sounds terribly grand, a bit like the A-team, but basically what a data breach team does for you is it brings together people in the business who you'd need to speak to if you had a data breach happen, and makes you just think a bit more about who you'd want to talk to. So people like your HR department, for instance, if you end up in a disciplinary matter with whoever's caused the breach, if it's an internal person. So it's good to have them on hand. Your IT team, if you have one, or whoever's providing your IT externally, you'd want to make sure that they can provide you with information about what's happened during a breach. And then maybe, depending on the size of your organisation, a divisional manager or a CEO or a data protection officer. It really depends on what size you are and how big your team is. And you probably want to have an external advisor as well, just to have them on hand to provide you with advice if a breach did happen. These are services that we do offer. So if you did just want to have a talk about, what a team could look like, or what would happen if you did have a breach and how you would pick up the phone and get the help that you need when it happens, that's something we can certainly offer. So now we're going to have a look at breach response planning, and these slides have been designed so that you've got something, to take away, and you could perhaps even, send them around to your breach response team to think about how you're going to deal with a breach and have a chat about them. So if you have a breach, you need to record when the breach was discovered, as well as the date and the time that the remediation efforts began. The reason why you need to do this is because if you need to report it to a regulator, and that's a judgment call at the moment under the current law as to the severity of the breach, but after May 2018 under the GDPR becomes a legal requirement to report within 72 hours, which is a very short time scale, you've got to be able to explain to the regulator what happened. And remember, they're coming at it, from a position of no knowledge. So you need to take them through the story, and you need to tell the story comprehensively, and to have documents and information there that can help them to understand what's happened, and ultimately to try and ameliorate the situation without you being fined or without there being some sort of regulatory outcome for you. You'll need to also alert and activate your breach response team. So again, we've talked about maybe your IT team, your HR, external advisors. Get them together to see if you can help tell the story. People like IT are going to be able to give you details of what's happened with a breach, and maybe screenshots of what's happened if you've had a hack, or who sent out the email that they shouldn't have, or how the malware or the virus ended up on your computers. Really important to get them involved from the outset. You'll then need to get your systems secure, both physical and digital systems. So again, that's about speaking to your IT team or your IT service provider about what you can do to get basically yourself battened down against further risk. And then you need to resist the urge to tinker with what's happened until your forensic team have accessed the system. So we have ethical hackers who can come in and tell you exactly how a breach happened if that's something that your IT team or provider can't service. It's a good idea to get a ethical hacker in, because they can give you that sort of forensic report in a manner that's something that's very translatable and able to provide on to the regulator. So it's a good idea to commission one. They're not hugely expensive, so I wouldn't be too put off by cost, but do have a think about that. We have a forensic team who we can provide to you. It's certainly worth considering making use of them, because it's sometimes a false economy to try and do it yourself and not pull together the correct information, or not secure things before they're deleted or go beyond recovery. You need to make sure you're gathering all of the information. And then you'll need to document what happened and tell the story. Get screenshots. What happened? Why did it happen? Was it something that was preventable? You need to think about all these things. If you do have a breach and you're struggling to pull that document together, do feel free to contact us for some advice. There are forms available via the Information Commissioner's website in the UK which help you to report a breach, but sometimes they don't cover off everything that you need to tell the regulator, and in terms of telling a full story, a full and frank story about what's happened, so that they can help determine what the outcome should be. It's also important to have a think about what policies you have in place, because if you end up with a report to a regulator and they ask you, well, what measures did you have in place to prevent this happening? It's not just enough to show you had operational measures in place. They will ask you what privacy policies you had, what your staff understood, and how they were trained, which really shows again that prevention and is better than cure approach is so important. So if you do want training sessions, do let us know. We offer a range of webinars. We can even come in person and deliver sessions. I'd highly recommend you train your staff on these points, and do have a look at the policies that are available, because you really do need to have those. It's very important. If you've already got copies, dig them out and have a think about whether, they're really comprehensive enough, because really sort of a 2-page policy isn't sufficient to cover the level of detail that data protection law requires in terms of making sure that data is secure. So I suppose in this session, the one thing I'm sort of hoping you'll take away from it is the importance of a policy and a training plan. So do have a think about those, and if you want to put some things on your agenda for compliance towards the General Data Protection Regulation, there are a couple of very important ones. Because really, until you've done the training and you have a basic policy in place, it's quite difficult to go off and do any of the other compliance requirements. So interview people who are involved with the breach as well. Keep it relatively low key. Just help, to understand what's happened with the breach. And it's important to get a contemporaneous account, because people can't remember what happened, months ago or weeks ago. So it's really important not to delay that procedure and to just get down, even if it's only some initial jottings, what happened at the time, to make sure that what you're saying is accurate and it's not embellished, or really important elements of the story have been forgotten. It's important to get that done very quickly. And as I said about protocols and plans and security policies, make sure you're reviewing those. And if you don't have them, it's super critical that you do get them in place. Really, really important. Please do take that away from today's session. Prioritise the risk based on what you know about the breach. I mean, is it a very small breach involving a very small amount of files? Maybe that's an example of a breach that's more containable. But if it relates to very sensitive health records, for instance, then that would be a more serious breach, even though it only affects a small number of people. Or are you in a very unfortunate position where it affects hundreds of records or thousands of records even? Have a think about what the size of the breach is. Consult with your external advisor. It's always a good idea to talk to your experts or your lawyers and the forensic team for the reasons that I've highlighted in this session. Do feel free to get in contact with us, even if you haven't had a breach, just to have a chat about, what services can be offered to you. More than anything, it's just useful for you to have a bit of an upskill on what happens, because nobody plans breaches, they just happen. So if you've done a little bit of forethought into it, at least you'll be in a better position to know, who you can call and, what you need to do basically to deal with a breach, rather than having to deal with it reactively rather than proactively. And then notify the regulator if required. As I've said, it's 72 hours under the law that's in force from May 2018, the General Data Protection Regulation. And under the current law, the Data Protection Act 1998, it depends on the nature and the severity of a breach. It might be worth getting some advice if you're not sure about whether to report or not, and it's something that, again, we can assist with. And if you've got cyber insurance in place, do notify your broker to make sure that you're complying with your policy terms and that you can actually make a claim against your policy. So another thing to do, if you've got that insurance in place and it's sat in your office now, just go have a look what the notification requirements are. So if something did happen, you can deal with it. So that's the end of today's session. It's really just a taster into how to manage a breach. So if you have any further questions, we'll always try to answer them in an upcoming Q&A. So do feel free to just pop them in the bar below. We've got a guide to the GDPR, which goes into great depth about it on DATATHENA. And as I've mentioned in the session, there are a couple of other free seminars that you can view, which go into depth on the requirements of GDPR and making sure that you have in place proper policies and procedures. Details of our services, which we've talked about too, are also available via the website. Do feel free just to drop an email. We're always happy to hear from you. There's no commitment to it, so we always just like to chat and make sure that people are getting compliant and are best served by the market. So, feel free, we're friendly. You can also visit DATATHENA for examples of the policies and more videos and updates. A lot of the content is free. You can also purchase the policies that we've talked about in the seminar, and you can also sign up to the weekly newsletter by clicking the link below. That's a good one, actually, because it covers off all of the legal updates that are happening that just keep you ahead of the curve in terms of what's happening with privacy, so that you don't have to go hunting for it. Thank you.